All right, coming at you from beautiful BC and actually Vegas this time.
Vegas.
2.0. My name is Kevin, and I got to tell you guys that being cremated is my last hope for a smoking hot body. Joining me as usual is the lovely Christine. Christine, how you doing, dear?
Hello.
Excellent. Christine, we have a very interesting show today, and we have a very interesting guest, because let me tell you something here. Very interesting. Did you know that overall 80% of Canadians believe that doctors play a central role, and followed by nurses at 73% and paramedics at 66%? In total, 90% of Canadians believe that paramedics play either a central role in Canada's healthcare system or an important role. And today, of course, we brought Luciano Nisi, author and ex-paramedic, to talk exactly about that in his book. Luciano, thank you so much for being with us on the show.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. I didn't know we had such a big audience. And thanks also, Chris, for inviting me to the podcast.
Excellent. Luciano, first of all, you're actually a local guy. You're right here in the region. And maybe you'd be so kind to give us like a quick bio as to who you are and what you did there in your life.
Uh-oh, we don't have enough time. No, just kidding. Well, I guess just a quick bio, just for sort of my background, medical thing, whatever. Or some of the things I've done is going back a number of years. I think I became interested in helping people, etc. So I joined St. John Ambulance at I think it was about 14 years old. So started participating in that and local first aid events, things like that, and then later joined a search and rescue team. So I was involved in that. And as things progressed, wanted to get more involved in things like that as a professional level. And at 23, I joined the military as a medic, and I was actually aspiring to be a SAR tech, search and rescue technician, which I still think is one of the coolest jobs out there. Didn't quite make it for various reasons, but so I served 6 years in that, and including a tour overseas, and then when I got back, I did various jobs and things. Got into the Coast Guard at the hovercraft base in Vancouver. I worked there for 8 years as a rescue specialist diver. But while I was working there, I started there in 2000. 2002, I got hired on with BC Ambulance as a paramedic part-time. As I still, that is one of the things I always wanted to do, actually, was be a street paramedic. Even back in the military, I tried to get on part-time while I was in the Army, but it didn't quite work out that way. It was a bit challenging when you're in the military and then try to do a civilian job on the side. So I did that part-time while I was in the Coast Guard. And then after I left the Coast Guard 8 years later, I still stayed part-time as a paramedic. And then I had switched from the Coast Guard to CBSA as a border officer, which really wasn't that good of a fit for me, I found out.
Really?
So I kind of had this pull between law enforcement and medical rescue stuff. So it was kind of a bit of a pull. But so eventually I decided to go full-time with the ambulance service. And then I continued on with that until just this April. I decided to finally resign after 18 years. With basically combined, I would say, I didn't do the math, but it's about 35 to 38 years combined medical rescue of time. So it was quite a number of years spent in that role, whether it be paramedic or rescue work. And I just I just decided to, I've done enough of that, and I wanted to shift things up a bit and just carry on with my own business ventures and some other things. So that's kind of where I'm at.
And you came out with the book that we see right behind you, actually. That's actually called Untold Stories of a Paramedic. So what prompted you to write that?
Yeah, so I guess it is actually officially my third book I wrote, but it's truly, I would say, my first real book, because it was the first one that I went through a publisher and had printed the way I did and had it distributed the way a normal book would. My first two books were ebooks, and they were distributed to a point, but it's not the same thing writing an ebook and then, having a printed book. So it was basically, I guess, a combination of things. Of one, we're on these calls and we're thinking, people aren't going to believe this happened, this type of call, and why someone called us and all that. And then the other aspect was, I thought, I wonder, there isn't I don't even know, there might be one other book written by a BC paramedic about, kind of how we operate and what we do here. And although there's been books written from other paramedics in the United States and, Australia and Britain, perhaps various countries and things, I just thought, it would be good to write about locally what, kind of things we deal with and maybe, what differences or similarities. And so I thought of writing a book of short stories, and that's what it is. So it's a compilation of short stories of all the calls that I've attended.
Mm.
And I tried to pick a variety that would give a good scope of what the job is versus, we're not doing, heart attacks and stabbings every day and that it doesn't work that way. A lot of the calls are quite routine and we'll say almost,
Mundane.
just not serious calls, right?
Yeah.
Some days I used to joke with my partner that we didn't pull the cot out for 4 days, right? Because all our patients were walking, or we didn't use anything in our kit except the BP cuff and the pulse ox and maybe a stethoscope. We didn't give any medications. We didn't give oxygen. We didn't, and that's the way it is. And then the next block, we're doing multiple trauma calls, cardiac arrests, overdoses, like you name it. So it just really depends where you are, what's going on. So
I think a lot of us have this unrealistic view of what paramedics do because we watch movies and we see paramedics coming in, they're jumping out of the back and clear, and they come with the paddles and clear, and they just shock the guy back to life. But in reality, it's nothing close to that. Being a paramedic.
No, you can be doing, like I say, a lot of sort of routine calls. We go to do a lot of care home calls. We do calls for people that are we got regular drunks that we end up picking up locally that they have their own substance abuse or issues they're dealing with, and so we deal with those. We get calls for simple things that really don't require an ambulance, we'll say, and even just a simple sprained ankle where someone can just be hopped to a car and go down and just get an x-ray to make sure it's not broken kind of thing. We get called to calls like that. On the other side of it too, we get calls to things like, anaphylaxis, chest pain, short of breath. The stabbings and shootings are actually often very, very more often gang related. That's pretty much predominantly the case from my experience. But and then of course there's car accidents and things like that. Obviously there's those sorts of things as well. But so it is a mixed variety. It really depends on the day, and I noticed depends on the community I'm working in. The types of calls we get are very. You notice that when you start working in a specific area. Whether I worked, downtown Vancouver, East Side, of course, has its own unique environment. But even just Vancouver is different than Surrey and Burnaby and Delta. There's different types of calls in those areas. I've definitely noticed. So I don't know if it's just demographics or, I'm not sure. But
I'm assuming like in some places of Vancouver, you probably get patients that get swallow kale wrong and they choke on that. And then in east side of Vancouver, there's like a stabbing with a needle.
Well, it was interesting because east side of Vancouver, I remember I didn't work a lot down there. I didn't work full time. It was when I did some part-time shifts and things like that, or when I was irreg. But I was very shocked. I remember because I hadn't been down there for a while, and literally every single call was a wait for the police. And the wait for the police call means that it's unsafe for us to enter without police presence. So it was just like, people barricaded into rooms or weapons potential or history of violence from this call taker. Or I was just like, every single call was always like that. I was like, where am I? Right. Like, we're working in, even in Surrey, you don't get that. Right. So, which is similar in some ways, but different. Right. But you get calls like that. So yeah, it was very interesting when I worked down there. I remember that. I was like, Jesus, every call's a wait for the police. Like, wow. So
do you feel that like you said, every area you work in has some slight differences, but as a whole, I mean, the brotherhood of paramedics, whether it's back east in Quebec or here on the West Coast or down south in Texas, you guys essentially are facing problems that are common to the entire profession.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And I can't speak obviously to areas outside of where I've worked specifically, but I would say it's fairly similar. When I read posts from various paramedic associations and groups, you know, and you share things. And we also have a couple paramedics that I worked with when I worked specifically in Surrey that were from the UK. And when I talked to them, they have similar issues. And then we had some exchange students come from China, various places from there, and they come to experience what it's like here. And the way they do things and how their medical guidelines and treatment guidelines and things are different, and there's differences in that aspect. But the same types of call situations are pretty similar, I would agree, across the board, no matter where you are in the world.
Mm. Do you feel that as far as the general public is concerned, they have a respect for the profession of being a paramedic?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say. And I think I really noticed a dramatic shift during when COVID came out. It was actually very profound. I think in general, I definitely had a very positive, the public's appreciation for us. I mean, multiple times I would say walk into Starbucks and someone says, yeah, your coffee was paid for, but the person won't announce who they are.
Mm.
Or you're in the drive-through and you get up to pay and they say, yeah, the person ahead of you paid for your coffees or whatever. Things like that would happen, randomly. And they often didn't want to get acknowledged. So there was, sometimes it happened in person as well and that, but so there was definitely that kind of like appreciation where people wanted to do something. They wanted to actually show their appreciation more than just say thank you. But when COVID came out, I think because we were the ones going in to the homes first with the unknown, we'll say, and because there was so much in the media about it and everything, and it was a bit unknown, especially when it started, like the transmission rates and exposures and our risks and things like that. No vaccines, obviously. And so it was quite amazing what type of appreciation we got for that. Yeah.
Mm. Interesting. Well, before we get into the maybe the more nitty gritty of the problems with the profession and where it's going, give us one of your favorite stories. I mean, you've seen a lot of things, so give us a few stories that that really touch you. Then, and I mean touch you, I mean your non-sexual way, of course, right?
Thank you for.
I knew that was coming somehow.
Yeah, of course. Well, exactly right. Well, okay. So I guess before I say a story, though, are you looking for when you say favorite story? Are you referring to something that happened? I'm just thinking. My brain's just spinning right now, trying to think of something. But
Something that's touching your mind, right?
what's that?
Okay.
Like, are you looking for something dramatic or?
The one that made you think the most, and the funniest story. How's that?
Sure. That
One that
great.
changed you the most.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, there's there's so many, and to say one, like so funny stories, I suppose. Yeah, you know what? I'll use this one as the funniest story. I think this one hands down is probably the funniest story, and it is in my book. And I titled it "The Onion." And a young man, probably about 22 years old, called 911 because his eyes were burning, and it was from processing an onion. And we were in the station, and we were just about going to be off shift within the hour or so. And I was just finishing off stories for my book, actually, at the time. And dispatch called and said, yeah, you're not going to believe this one. And, we've got a guy that's calling because his eyes are burning from cutting an onion. And I'm just like, are you for real? He's like, yeah. I said, you have to give me this call. Like, you have to keep me on this. Like, I need this story, right? So and it was a routine call, which means non-emergency, right? And what can happen often when you get a call, you can get upgraded to an emergency call, right?
Yeah.
I really wanted to be on this call, right? Like, you have no idea, because I wanted this story, because I thought, okay, this is one of those stories that you can't make up, right? You can't. And so I told my partner, I said, let's go. And then, of course, on our dispatch CAD, we have a screen in our ambulance, and it said, and it gives a description of the event, right? And it gives the address and everything. And then it says, it'll have like description of event and stuff. And it'll say, patient cutting onion, excessive tearing and burning in eyes, patient away from offending onion. When it said away from offending onion, like literally I started laughing and I'm like, oh my God. So, and I was driving, my partner was attending, really good guy. And so I was speeding to get to this call. Okay. It wasn't very far away, but I was so worried about it being upgraded because that's what would happen all the time. Because they'd say cancel, take instead, right? Like, I was short of breath, whatever. I literally begging the dispatcher, I'm like, you got to let me get to this call, right? I'm like speeding a little bit to get to this call, right? To get there. And it wasn't that far away. It was like, I think it was only 12 minutes away, fortunately. So we got there, we pull up. And once you're on scene, you're pretty much committed, right? Like once you're on scene. So we get to this residence, very nice residence and stuff. And we open the door and this person's there and he says, oh, I was just going to cancel, whatever. And my partner's like, no, we've got to come in. We better do a full medical assessment and make sure you're okay. Because he was adamant on the way that he wanted to bring this gentleman to the hospital. We have a bit of a sick humor because, he kind of wanted to present this person to a nurse, which would not be very understanding about this demise. So what happened during this call, my partner's very kind of serious about it. And he says, okay, let's sit down. He starts asking questions and you got to understand, like, I basically can't control myself here. Like I'm doing, I can't laugh because that's inappropriate and unprofessional. So I kept pretending I had a cough. And because I literally I didn't know what to do. Like I'm sitting there vibrating off to the side, right? So I don't show this guy that I'm laughing. And then of course my partner being very serious about all this stuff, he's asking a very serious, questions about all this stuff. And finally I was sitting at the table documenting some of these things. And my partner's looking across him with the most intensity and sincerity and says to him, so are you on any medications? Which would be a standard question you'd ask somebody, right? And then he says, no. And then he says, should you? So like I think I just started vibrating. I pretended I was practically choking. I said, I got to step outside for a minute. I literally walked outside. I went in the ambulance and I literally laughed to tears for at least 5 minutes easily. I literally was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. And I'm thinking, okay, my partner's okay. He's like, nothing. This guy's not going to collapse on us. So he's not like I'm abandoning any patient. But so then I got composure myself and I walked back in and I was like, okay. So then when I walked in, like, my partner's trying to convince this guy to go to the hospital. So I come in and I'm listening to a little bit of the conversation. So I look at the guy kind of intently and I said, sir, where's the onion now? Right. He says, oh, it's in the kitchen. Do you want to see? I said, yes, please. Could you show me? So we get up and we walk in the kitchen and I walk in and I see a food processor. She's got this onion shredded in it, right? So then I look at him very intently. Now, I think his brother or something came in. He was probably about 12 years old. He comes in and he's kind of like observing what's going on here with all this questions and stuff, right? And I said, do you have any onions in their natural state? Because I took a picture of the processed onion. So then I go over to the onions and I see some red and white onions, and I take a picture and I said, "So which onion were you using? A red one or a white one?" And he goes, "Oh, I was using the white ones." I said, "Okay."
Yeah, that's racist.
so then I go back and after we finished, talking to him, I looked at him very intently and I said, "Sir, in the future, I would recommend you avoid dicing, chopping, or otherwise processing white onions." Well, I think at that moment, the 12-year-old kind of looked and he realized that we were kind of, we'll say, mocking him a little bit. And he kind of got that look. When you have cartoons and they have that little whiff of smoke above their head, like this realization comes that this is absolutely ridiculous. And he got this look on his face and he just walked out of the kitchen. And then I think the guy finally picked up on it when I said that. And he said, "Yeah, I don't need to go to the hospital." And I'm like, no. I said, "I think we should get. He goes, "Well, it's not really burning me anymore." And my partner's still trying to convince him. And I'm like, well. So anyways, he finally refused and we finally left. Like, I think the realization finally came to him. Now, you need to understand, they're still going to get billed $50 for that response. So I don't know, like he lived at home with his parents. So I'm sure when that bill came in, there was some questions and some concerns about why he called. But So that would probably be hands down, I would say, to my mind right now, the funniest call I've ever been on was the
It
onion.
was probably an expensive salad after that. $50. Well, you see,
It was like, so like I said, you can't make this stuff up, right? Like
no,
you just can't.
no.
Like you can't make it like that up.
And
How
for
old-
our audience out there, for anybody who's chopping onions, the
Who's
trick
the
with
kid?
onions, what's that?
I missed that because everybody froze. I was wondering how old the kid was about.
About 12.
The
No,
onion
no.
kid.
The young boy was 12.
Okay,
He was
I
about
thought that
20. He was about 22,
Okay.
give or take.
And as I was saying, for our audience out there, the trick with onions is not to form an emotional bond with them, as you can.
Like I said, it was just in disbelief. Like I've been to lots of other calls as well, but like that one, I think is pretty much, yeah. That's probably the funniest. Yeah.
You know, David Lee Roth, the singer, uh, later on had a career as a paramedic as well.
Oh, really?
I remember him saying that. He said, you know, when you see a birth, when you see a woman give birth, that's when, as a paramedic, you've seen it all, and you call it quit. Was there a moment like that for you?
When a call was too much, or just
When you did a call and you said, okay, that's it. I've done a career.
no, but one of the reasons I left the career was because of and I have no problem saying this actually now, because it's taken a number of years to accept it, and I think it needs to be brought, the awareness brought out as well. But when I served in the military, I went to Rwanda, Africa in '94, and it ended up being a rather intense operation in the sense of what we were exposed to. So anybody that doesn't know, this is when there was a civil war. It lasted a little over 3 months, and just about 800,000 Tutsis were massacred in a very short period of time. We went in as a humanitarian mission as the Canadian military. We weren't under the UN or anything. It was Canadian military. But during that operation, there was a lot of sights, sounds, and things that we were exposed to. One incident that I was exposed to was a hostage situation I was in, and I didn't find out until 21 years later that I had been affected by PTSD. So it literally took 21 years before I finally sought an assessment of, it kind of just came about through some various things that maybe there was something bothering me. And so what happened with my career, I already worked, in the Coast Guard, recovering bodies and various other things we were dealing with, and then as a paramedic. So as far as the final thing that came was, it was actually not a serious call. It was actually a guy that was drunk. He was an alcoholic. The family had called us because he did have a cardiac history, but he had been drunk for a week and they didn't know what to do with him. And ironically, the family member was a nurse. Okay. So I was like, and that was the call literally that caused me to say, I'm done. It wasn't a trauma call, but having said that, the constant exposure to trauma was continually affecting me in a negative way. So I decided this call kind of was the one that caused it for me. But like most people think it was something traumatic, but it wasn't. But the cumulative effect of all those calls were no longer beneficial to me. So I decided that it's better to step away from it after 19 years of doing that particular role and say, yeah, okay, I'm okay with this. Like I've done enough. So, but there was some other calls that there was a call that actually affected me quite a bit. I don't know if you want me to get into that or not, but there was a call that actually affected me probably a couple of years prior to that. And a couple of them actually, but so there was some specific calls that probably assisted in that decision,
Yeah,
if you can call it.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's not like there's different facets to the whole PTSD thing. Is that a lot of people just assume every paramedic, cop, and firefighter has PTSD, which thankfully they don't. But the other thing is, there's like, just because of the work of the job, they're like, well, of course you have it. It's like, well, the thing that happened in Rwanda, I was exposed to a lot of stuff, but there was one specific incident that literally was sort of, we'll say, the overall cause of it.
Yep.
And essentially it's your body's inability to properly process that information and let it go. Right. That's in a nutshell, that's how I'd say it goes. your brain, your memory hangs on to it and doesn't process it and let it go. And that's what often creates a sort of a PTSD type situation. Cumulative can have that too as well, and other things. There's other factors, but I'm just saying that in particular, like that can be a factor. But all the other things I saw, say in Rwanda, or how many body recovers I did with the Coast Guard, all of those incidents could have caused it as well, but they didn't. So that's what I'm saying. Trauma in itself and being exposed to it. People that do that kind of work, we get excited and ramped up to do that type of work in the first place. So that, I think, is a protection shield for people that do it, whether you're a nurse working in an ER or a trauma room or a paramedic, frontline worker, whatever. I think that's what draws you in the first place. And you don't, nobody goes in the job thinking they're going to be affected later in life, right? I certainly did.
Of course.
So.
Is there among paramedics? I mean, I used to do some jobs in security and law enforcement really myself, and I seem to develop a sense of dark humor to deal with some of these these situations. I'm assuming it was the same for paramedics.
Yeah, I remember actually even it was actually a Coast Guard call. It wasn't even a paramedic call, but I remember that it was very pronounced, the dark humor, because we had just recovered a bridge jumper that literally jumped off the Patilla Bridge, and we almost hit the hovercraft. We had drifted in with the current. It was just the way it worked out. But we pulled this person out of the water, pulled them in, and we were doing CPR and everything, and putting a defibrillator on them and everything. And I can't remember exactly the comment I made, but it was quite dark and callous, and it would have been viewed by bystanders as being probably very inappropriate.
Yeah,
the crew was only on board and everything, but yeah, there's a lot of that, and that's pretty common across the board. I know nurses use it, and other first responders like police and fire also use it. It is a coping mechanism, and I think a lot of times bystanders, they don't understand it. If they see it or hear it, they might think it's inappropriate.
Oh, absolutely.
Because from a third party view, I would probably say it's inappropriate, but that is our coping mechanism, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember years ago when I was working in the Port of Vancouver, and there was an accident, and the car caught on fire. The passengers died, and they're literally the paramedics and the fire department are literally like sweeping the remnants of the corpses, the charred corpses, and we're holding the public back. And I kind of elbowed my buddy, said, "Well, they're going to save money on cremation costs, right?"
Yeah. See that exactly. That would be a classic dark type statement that you'd make, because I mean, it's interesting for paramedics. I can say paramedics across the board, we want to go to the worst call. We want to go to the train crash. We want to go to the worst call, but we don't want anyone to die.
Yeah.
So it's like this. We want to go to the worst call because we want to experience it, and we want to be challenged to our limits. That's essentially the way I would put it, at least for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want anybody to die, of course. We want everybody to be okay at the end.
Yeah.
And we obviously want to hopefully make a difference in that aspect as well. But we want to go to the worst calls. It's amazing. Like if you can have all these calls holding, but if dispatch comes over the air and says, "Can a crew clear for a stabbing?" Within seconds, crews that are basically trying to take a 5-10 minute break to grab a bite between their calls will be on the air. You'll have 4 units instantly within less than 30 seconds responding that they're available. Because there's not a lot we can typically do for them, but it's a more exciting call than, say, the calls they've been doing for the rest of that day.
I don't know. Onion-related calls seem pretty exciting to me, too.
What's that?
The onion-related calls seem pretty exciting to me as well.
But there's another side to it, too. There's a very... you're just talking about funny stories. I'm just thinking of another one that was kind of funny. And this couple had been probably married for, I don't know, maybe 40 years, whatever. They were in their perhaps late 70s, 80s, whatever. And they were in a townhome, and we picked them up. And the gentleman need to go in the hospital, but he wasn't, it wasn't an emergency. And we had him on the cot and everything. And his wife says, "Dear, would you like me to hold on to your wallet for safekeeping?" And he looks at her like as straight eye as possible and serious and says, "Well, if I want it for safekeeping, I'm not going to leave it in your hands. I'm going to keep it myself." and it was so funny to me because I'm just like, they were just this adorable couple, and Erie's on the cot, and she's staring at him, and I'm just like, for real, like, like it was just priceless. Like it was just priceless. So
Oh man,
yeah.
Luciano, you've seen it all in BC and all that, but if we dig deeper into the system itself, of paramedics, I get the impression as a layperson that paramedics are getting a raw deal. I get the impression that you guys are underfunded, underpaid, understaffed, under everything. And you would think, with the stat I showed up at the beginning, where 80%, 90% of Canadians think that paramedics are an essential part of the healthcare system, you would think that would change. Where do you see the problems lying here? As a man who's been on,
well, there's a couple things, I suppose. One of them, I can only speak for BCHS now it's called, but it used to be called BC Ambulance, and they've retooled the name a little bit over the years. There's been some change in administration, but the big thing is there's no proper PR person. So an incident happens, we do have a PR person, but they're never making statements. They're not on the news. You'll very often see, if a call happens, a local fire captain or battalion chief or somebody, whoever, speaking about the call on the fire department's half, but we never hear it from the ambulance. And you'll often have one for the police agency. I know at least Vancouver Police has a very good PR person that does go in front of the camera and make announcements and statements about various things. So that's a disfavor because we never hear the story from our side. And maybe clarifying things like, why was the ambulance delayed or whatever. So that's one thing that happens. The other thing is that, and it's interesting, you have those statistics about people being supportive of paramedics. I don't know if those are recent or not, but for instance, and I will say this because the community of Delta, the mayor is very fond of firefighters, and much more so than paramedics, for I'm not sure what reason exactly, but she wanted their crews specifically there to have more ability to treat patients, etc. Because, in her mind, I was there first. Well, there is some truth to that, but there's a reason for it. So if you look at any given geographical map of a community, you might see 5 fire stations on the map. Now, they're not all necessarily full-time staffed fire stations, but there are there. So they're either volunteered by paid on call, or there'd be some full-time crews, depending on what their needs are. Now, their primary role is fighting fires, rescue, things like that. It's not medical. Okay. They respond to our calls. Basically, they get dispatched through our system as if they can assist and provide some assistance and care, so they can get to the call first. Okay, but if they're sitting not doing anything and they're sitting in their station waiting for a fire call, or something related to the fire department's role, they will get there first because the crews are running around doing nosebleed calls and things like that, or whatever, or delayed in hospitals, or just short staffed, and they're not available, so the fire department gets there first. So a lot of times people just assume, and they've done this, they actually call the fire department. They don't call us because they're like, well, the fire department gets here first.
yes.
Okay, so depending on the call, there's really not a lot firemen can do. Okay, if it's a cardiac arrest, yes, they can assist, and they can provide, obviously, rescue efforts, but it is also limited. The big thing is they can't transport. Okay, they don't have an ambulance, which is really where they need to do. See, our job is to assess, stabilize, and transport to the hospital, right? That's essentially what it is. Our interventions are to stabilize and maintain, and I always say, so the hospital can save them. Okay, now we do save lives on occasion. Don't get me wrong, we do make a difference in that case, but so with the fire department, their role is to assist that stabilization process, but oftentimes it's more of a comforting measure in a lot of ways. Like if it's not a serious call, it's more just comforting that there's someone there. But in reality, unless it's a serious bleed or something, they have no medications virtually to give. So what role is that department doing now? And then what happens is, if you look at how much money is allocated to fire departments versus ambulance stations and the medical side of it, I don't know what the volume difference is, but it's huge. Okay, so you're now putting more money towards an agency, a resource that isn't able to treat people. Okay. Now, I'm not saying we don't need fire department. We absolutely do. And when they're on multi-layer calls, cardiac arrest, MVAs, whatever, it's awesome, right? We need them. We need their help. But there's too many times where money's being allocated for their resources to be dispatched versus where another ambulance should be placed at a station or in an area to cover that lacking of that need, if that makes sense. So that's one part of it. Let's see. The other part up until recently, and I just found this out because I just actually did a book signing yesterday in Langley, and I talked to a fairly new paramedic. And in the past, it would take you about 5.5 years part-time before you would be eligible for full-time work. That's a long time to wait. Okay. You don't have to wait for that to get on a police force. And I don't know, the fire service is a bit different too, but I'm not saying it's easy because they have their recruiting process as well. But normally if you're applying for a full-time position as a firefighter, once you get hired, you're hired. You're on probation, but you're hired. You're working. You're not working part-time. Okay. So, but now recently, because of the, I guess they're really having a staffing issues, and I didn't realize it was bad, but literally paramedics are literally getting full-time spots almost immediately off the street, which has never happened ever since I've been with the service in 19 years. Yeah. So that's been a shift. There's a real lack of paramedics. I mean, the wage disparity is also a bit of an issue. I don't know if that's the reason why you're not getting people applying. And I don't know off the top of my head what the starting wage is, but I would probably guess it's probably about $25, $26 an hour.
Nothing.
And I do know that when I was looking at shifting from my career as a paramedic to other things, I do have some background investigation and things like that. So I was looking at bylaws, and specifically there was a position I found, an entry-level bylaws officer in Langley, that was getting paid, I believe it was $2 or $3 more than my current wage at 19 years as a paramedic.
That's outrageous.
Right. So there's those things as well. I don't know. I'm trying to think if I missed something with your question. I hope I didn't divert too much, but those are a few things that I've identified for sure.
We get a pretty clear image as to why it's difficult to recruit paramedics because, I mean, for example, we've always heard the idea that, when you guys are on hold and you're just sitting there waiting for a next call, you guys are paid like $2 an hour. Is that an actual thing?
Well, it used to be. Yeah, that was called pager pay. And that was assigned. Basically, what that was designed for was the same system as they have the volunteer firefighters in communities, especially small ones. So they have people that get paid until they get called. And with paramedics, you carry a pager. And then when you get called, you get a 4-hour call out. And in very rural areas and that, but what happens is you don't have enough local people. It's designed that you're local, you live there, and then you carry a pager. The problems with that is a couple. So first of all, if you have 2 paramedics local that do staff that, okay, so obviously you have to be available and you can't be drinking or anything like that. Yeah. But when the pager goes off, you have to either get to the station, change at home, whatever. You got to drive there. So let's say it takes you 10 minutes to get to the station. Then you get in your ambulance. Then you respond to your call. So there's a delay, an excessive amount of delay, right? So if it's a serious call, that's causing some issues. Yeah. But what would happen is because they couldn't get the staff, and I did this for 2.5 years, say in Lytton, for instance. I drove from Vancouver and then Abbotsford when I moved to Lytton to staff an ambulance and what they do is they'd put you on back-to-back shifts. So you'd work, say, 3 12-hour shifts in a row at $2 an hour until you got call out. So you'd stay at the station, right? So this is what's happening. So you're essentially living at the station on this pager pay. I don't know how much of it's changed now. I know they're getting away from that, and they changed it to a thing where you had to be in uniform, but they paid you $10 an hour, and then you got the 4-hour call out. So you're making more money on standby, but you actually had to be in uniform. And they called that a Fox pattern. But then I don't know now. I know there's a shift where they're starting to staff communities with full paid paramedics now. So I don't know if that's across the board or what. I don't know the dynamics. I haven't been really involved with it. The knowledge of that in the last couple of years have been kind of distant. So I'm not sure the specifics of that. It is changing, but I do know that the staffing issues have been there since I've been there.
Mm.
So,
sorry.
I need to interrupt you to say goodbye. and to thank you for the discussion. And I will see you next week, Kevin. And I'm really looking forward to reading your book. And
Thank
I'm
you.
so happy. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks for
bye.
joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, now that we've got rid of her,
Yeah, now we can talk stuff, right?
that's right. Now we can talk. No,
Good.
what I wanted to say that you're a man who's seen essentially both sides of this equation. If let's do a magic wand moment here. You know, I've given you a magic wand, and you know you're in charge of changing the world to make it better for paramedics. What would you do? What would you, if you were in charge of government? What would you do to make this happen?
Well, I would look at where a lot of it turns into funding issues, but I think first of all, you got to bring the wages up a bit, because what's happening is paramedics are working a lot of overtime to make up the difference, especially in the Lower Mainland, the cost of living. And it's not to sound greedy at all. It's just that, you know, when so from what I've looked at, and I'm not trying to pick on firefighters, but a third-year firefighter on average makes about $100,000 a year. Okay. That's a pretty comfortable career. And I understand there's risks and dangers, especially if they're fighting fires, but they're not fighting that many fires. You know, they're doing a lot of medical responses and stuff, so which a lot of them don't like to do. Some of them do. But if you look at the average wage of a full-time paramedic, say PCP level, so primary care paramedic, which is sort of we'll say not the entry level, but there's a level below that, but we won't get into that one, the EMR level. Because essentially it's PCP, right? Primary care paramedic, advanced care paramedic, and then critical care paramedic. Okay, so that's the levels. Critical care paramedics are the ones that fly in the helicopters and the jets and that. So there's quite a bit of difference in training and knowledge between those levels. But so a primary care paramedic, you're looking at around I don't know, 70-ish thousand a year versus 100. So that's a huge difference in pay. Right there. So I think that would be one step in improving retention and people wanting to do the career, is that make it attractive enough that you're being compensated. Now, recently, in the last contract, they did manage to give us shift differential, but it was a bit of a modified one for nights and weekends, or nights, which has never been in the service at all. Whereas nurses have had that forever. I know when I worked as a border officer, we got a shift differential for weekends and nights. Pardon me. Because one of the most difficult staffing places was night shifts. And when ambulances are down, what does it do? It just puts a strain on the other crews, right? There's more calls. You know, every time you drop an ambulance, you're losing, well, between 8 and 15 responses, but at least probably 8 to 10 transports, depending on the night and the delays in the hospitals and stuff. So that puts a strain on the system, right? So how do you make it more attractive for people to work nights? Or, you know, there's also a lot of morale issues. There's not a lot of support by upper management. I found I won't get into details, but there's a number of things that have happened to me in my career and other people that I know, where situations happen and they literally assume you're at fault and they don't back you. So if you don't feel backed by your employer, you know, it's a very difficult. They approach it as a disciplinary process versus a investigative process.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not very good that way. And I think maybe with this idea that maybe paramedics are getting hired full-time and full-time work faster is probably, it might help. I don't know. Hopefully that will help. But literally they need to put more cars on the street. Now, the problem though is if you can't staff the ambulances you have now, what's the reason? Right? And I don't actually have that answer for you, unfortunately. But I know there's a lot of burnout. I know paramedics are working too many hours. They're working overtime. There was lots of threats going on in the earlier days that, are you refusing to do this call because people are done? I've done cardiac arrests. Like, I just finished cleaning up after it, and they're begging us to get on the air to do a call. And it's like, well, you know, they never used to ask, like, do you need a few minutes? You know, for the mental health aspect. And another thing, what people aren't aware of, if for statistics go, and I don't know what they are today. This was a couple of years ago that I know about it. But paramedics were the highest suicide rate of all the emergency services together, and that includes military, police, and fire department.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that was a bit shocking to me. I didn't realize it was that high, actually.
Wow.
So,
I mean-
so like, and there wasn't a lot of support. I mean, that's changed a lot. So there's a lot of improvements in that area. But but as far as, I don't know exactly what the answer is to your question. I think some of those things would help. But I could ask my colleagues, kind of thing, and you might get 10, 15 different responses as well of what to do. I know our managers, a lot of our new managers now are fantastic. A lot of the unit chiefs are really good that work in the stations, which has helped a lot change morale and that. Sometimes I notice there's a bit of lacking of work ethic, and I don't know where that comes from. Where crews aren't washing their ambulance when they should. That's part of our duties, and I don't know where that comes from. Maintaining the pride of what we're doing. Polishing your boots, making sure you're looking good for your presentation.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly, like you're saying, the wand, but I think if anything, make sure that the funding is going. If we're short paramedics, if we're short ambulances, and we need people to do medical calls, then maybe we need to put some money towards that. Versus when I heard Vancouver, over 1 week, the mayor and the council they staffed, I think, 2 or 3 rescue trucks at $150,000 a year or $300,000 a year. It was like $1 million for 2 rescue trucks or something, with wages and the vehicles, because of overdoses. Well, giving Narcan and to an overdose is not the magic fix, and that was their answer. So it's a little not thinking the big picture.
I think it would. Well, that's politics, of course.
Right. So,
Luciano, there might be somebody out there that watches this now or down the road that who wants to become a paramedic. Young fella, young girl. What advice would you, as a veteran yourself, give them, to the next generation of people getting into the business?
Well, I would say take care of yourself. Come in with a good work ethic, and know when you have to, push past some of the limits. Because one thing that, we don't get breaks, right? Like, there's no such thing. I could go on a break. They started that a few years ago, where you go on a break. But if a call comes in, a code 3 call, which is the emergency lights and siren call, that's code 3 call, you're off your break. So you don't really have a break. Okay. So we used to massage breaks after. We wouldn't clear the hospital, and we'd have always food with us, and we'd eat, because you literally didn't have time to eat or grab a coffee, right? Because of the volume. And you need that unwinding time. So you need to be able to take care of yourself. Now, sometimes you got to push through that and just do that call or whatever, right? But you can't push crews like that constantly, day after day, and expect them. Then what happens is they book off. They'll book off the shift. They'll book off the next day. So there's a cascading effect to that. So if you're new, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And that doesn't mean to be slack. Come in with a good attitude, like work hard and do your best. But make sure you take care of yourself. And if you need some time between a call, if a call is affecting you, make sure you call the CIS team. Do whatever you do. Make sure you don't allow that cumulative effect or stressors to build to the point where it's affecting you later down the road, and pretend that you're tough, you can handle it, because that's what I thought, especially with the military. I guess just be aware of the job, that there's certain parts of that aren't going to change. The wages, I don't know where they're going to go, but be prepared that you're not going to be making the top wages. And if you want to make a lot of money, then maybe get into something like nursing or something, where they get paid more, and you have to go to school and get your degree. But the program's changing as well, because right now what they're doing is, and they've been looking at this for a couple of years, and it is changing now, where the PCP program will be a diploma, and the ACP, which is Advanced Cardiac Care Paramedic, will be a degree program. It's being professionally recognized higher levels now. So I think that will also help in just the recognition as far as that goes. But I Yeah, most people that get into the job is just it's a passion and a desire to do it, and I would say overall most people enjoy it even with the challenges.
Mm,
But
fantastic.
but yeah, so I hopefully that's answered the question you asked me. But
The book is Untold Stories of a Paramedic. Luciano, thank you so much for being with us on the show. If people want to find out your book and get a copy, where can they find
well, you know what? It's available on Indigo, Amazon. I also sell it on my website, signed copies if people want to order it. And it's just my last name, -books.com. So Nisi-books.com. So I do mail out signed copies. But yeah, it's available, like I say, on major like Indigo and Amazon and things like that. If you want a copy and read it, it's been well received. Like I said, I sold 21 books yesterday in Langley in 3 hours, so it was pretty good, pretty popular. So still doing well, and I've got your copy here ready to sign off and mail to you, and you're gonna ask me your address, and I'm gonna kick you a copy, and it sounds like Chris wanted a copy as well, so I'll mail you guys out some copies, and you can read it. But the only condition is you have to leave me a review on Indigo or somewhere. So
That's a fair deal.
and it has to be a good review, or don't leave it. Right?
Fair enough. I'll do.
4 stars or better. Like, come on. Like, what are we doing here?
Luciano, thank you so much for being on the show. Before I let you go, I gotta have you say hi. This is Luciano Nisi, and I took a left to the valley.
Hi, this is Luciano Nisi, and I have been on Left of the Valley.
Good enough.